If you live in the United States and you currently own a home or you're looking to buy a home in the future, then this video is for you. The real estate industry is going through some changes, and I want to walk you through the main changes that you may need to know as you go through the process of selling your home or buying a new home in the coming years. So I want to give you the story so far. The story so far is that in the recent years, there have been several lawsuits against the NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors, the trade body that supports the real estate community, and several real estate brokerages. And to spare you all the details, at the end of, as of August 2024, several of these parties have entered into a settlement agreement, and this has resulted in one big thing: a bundle of practice changes, fundamentally changing the way real estate transactions are actually happening in the United States going forward. And I'd like to break down exactly what this is for you so that you have a good understanding whether you currently own a home, thinking about selling it, or maybe buying a home in the near future. So first you may be asking, hey, but wait, who are you and why should I really care about what you have to say? So I'm glad you asked. My name is Sharran Srivatsaa. I've been in this business 20 plus years. I have been an entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley. I've been an investment banker at Goldman Sachs and at Credit Suisse. I have run a private equity firm for the last decade. I've been a real estate investor, and I own thousands of units of real estate. And over the last many years, I have overseen 100,000 plus real estate transactions in all 50 states plus DC. So I have a decent understanding of this process overall. And today we currently operate one of the largest publicly traded real estate companies in the world. So it gives us a unique advantage into seeing what is happening overall and how we can help. But the main purpose of this video is to help our clients understand the chunky rules that are coming in place so that you have a broad idea of what is actually at play and how it actually works. So the thing that I want to share with you today are the three things that every homeowner needs to know going forward with these new rule set changes. And it may get a little complex. So I'm actually going to get off this screen, and I'm going to get onto my iPad and draw it out for you to explain to you how this process works overall. So there's three big changes coming to the real estate business in 2024. The first one is a representation approach. And this means that based on our licensed agents helping us, there's going to be representation involved in every part of the transaction. Second is a little bit more technical. We call this decoupling of compensation. And I will actually break down how this works for you overall with a couple of scenarios. And third is there are some process and practice upgrades to allow you to understand how the process works, and mainly for the agent and how they actually deal with all of this. So let me break this down. By the way, this is going to get a little complex as I draw with some clip art for you, and the main goal for that is to help you understand this process really well. So let's actually get into it. The first part of this is understanding representation. You're going to see a few of my slides where on the left-hand side of the page is going to be what happens in the past. And then on the right-hand side of the page is going to be what happens in the future on a go-forward basis. And that's what I kind of want to break down for you. So let's break down the representation-based approach. So let's say you are what we call a seller, meaning you own this home and you are the seller that wants to sell this home, right? So what you would do in the old world is you would enter into what we call a listing agreement. A listing agreement. And you would enter into this listing agreement with an agent. And this agent has this responsibility to represent you as the seller to bring your home to market and do everything that it needs to get sold. This is the traditional way it's been done. And the best part is going forward into the future, this is exactly similar. Now, there may be some small nuances in the process of the implementation of the forms, et cetera, and the contracts and how they work. But in the philosophical way, that process on the listing side, getting representation stays the same because it has always been that way, which is good. Now, let's talk about the buyer side of the situation. So let's say we have three potential buyers. There's generally been an informal relationship between the buyers and their agents, and each of their agents saying that, hey, help me tour properties, show me properties, and then help me get into the home that I want. So all these buyers and their agents actually help these buyers tour these properties. So this is buyer number one, buyer number two, buyer number three, right? So there was an informal representation already built in place overall. So in the future, this is what is in play right now. in the future, we're going to have 3 potential buyers, buyer 1, buyer 2, and buyer 3. That's great. And we're going to have agents, agent 1, agent 2, agent 3 representing these buyers. But what we're going to do, the rule set calls for a formalization of representation, which means each of these agents and these buyers need to enter into what we call a buyer representation agreement. So there is going to be a buyer representation agreement on the front end of the relationship that then allows each of the buyers to work with the clients to help them actually tour homes. So the main distinction right now that you should note is that before seeing homes, before touring homes, before being in an actively engaged process of working with the real estate agent to buy a home, we need to engage into a buyer representation agreement, very similar to how we engage into a listing agreement to sell the house. So that's the process. Now, so that's going to happen. So when you contact an agent or contact your agent about this, you will be requested to go through this process. They will explain the agreement to you and all the terms associated with it. The one question that I get asked often here is, hey, Sharran, if there was an open house down the street and I want to go check out this open house, would I need to actually have a buyer representation agreement in place before I actually take this open house? No, as the open house is a public event and that is being done on behalf of the seller with representation of the seller by the listing agent in this case. So you as a buyer or a previewer of this property would not need a buyer representation agreement in this process. But most importantly, before you buy a home, you will need to have a buyer representation agreement in place with the buyer. That's number 1. Here is number 2. So before we actually break all that down, you may be saying, all right, Sharran, now there's another agreement. I kind of want to know what all the agreements are in place. And so I always talk to our clients and I explain that there are 3 agreements that govern a real estate transaction. There's a listing agreement, there's a buyer agreement, and there's a purchase agreement. And I will tell you exactly who are the parties involved in this. The listing agreement is between the seller of the house or the homeowner with the listing agent. And by the way, the technicality is an agent is a licensed salesperson that actually works with a broker or the company. So if I say broker or brokerage, I mean the company that they're working with, and the listing agent is the individual licensed person that you're working with. For the ease of this discussion, I'm just going to continue to use agent as a proxy for the licensed person that you're working with, just from a technicality perspective. The buyer agreement is between the buyer, home buyer, and the buyer agent. And third, the purchase agreement is the agreement between the seller of the home and the buyer of the home. So these 2 agreements actually talk about representation. And this agreement is the offer, which an offer is just the terms of exchange. So this agreement is the terms of exchange, and the other 2 agreements are governed representation overall. These are the 3 agreements that broadly govern a real estate transaction. Every other agreement is a derivation of this in some way to either facilitate the offer and the terms of agreement or to actually support the representation in a very particular way. So based on your situation, you will have 2 of these, either a buyer agreement and a purchase agreement or a listing agreement, purchase agreement to ensure that the transaction goes smoothly. All right. So let's get into the big, I told you there were 3 things. Number 1, the representation-based approach, which we talked about here, where you will need a buyer representation agreement to actually engage with a buyer agent and see and tour homes and go through the process. The second is, this is a little bit more complex, but once I break it all down for you, I think you'll get it very quickly, which is the decoupling of compensation. So first, I want to explain what happens in the past so that you have a good understanding of it, and then I'll tell you what's going to happen in the future so you have a good understanding of that overall. So what happens in the past. So let's say a seller hires a seller puts a home on the market, right? Seller puts a home on the market here, and let's say they put the home on the market for, I'm making up numbers, $500,000. And let's say they agree to pay a total commission of $10,000. I'm using numbers here to make it easy. And say the listing agent in this case says that they agree and have negotiated $6,000 to pay the listing agent, which means there's $4,000 available for the buyer's agent. So the seller in this case would pay $10,000 to the listing agent or the listing broker in this case. And so what the listing agent or the broker would do at closing of the transaction is that they would keep $6,000 out of the $10,000, and they would then share $4,000 of it with the buyer agent. This way, the buyer does not come out of pocket in any way, right? And because the cost of the commission is rolled into the purchase price based on the overall transaction. And this process of sharing commissions is called cooperation compensation. This has been a fundamental thing that has been in place that allows for seller, listing agents, and buyer agents to cooperate to get the result that they want for their client. This is how everything has happened so far in the past, which is good. However, let me tell you about what's going to happen in the future. What's going to happen in the future is the listing agent is still going to work for the seller, and the seller is going to pay the listing agent. Most of the thing that's in question are what's going to happen on the buyer side. Who is going to pay the buyer agent? And we see 4 scenarios in which the buyer agent gets paid. And I want to show you these 4 major scenarios. Every other scenario is probably a derivation of this in some way. So let me take you through it. So in scenario number 1, the seller will still pay the listing agent their $6,000. Seller's already thought about and kind of semi-agreed to in her head the $10,000. Seller will pay the listing agent, and the seller will also pay the buyer agent directly. So that is scenario number 1. In the second scenario, the seller continues to pay the listing agent their $6,000. Then the buyer maybe will pay the buyer agent directly. So this is called seller or buyer directed compensation, right? So as you see, the seller pays the listing agent directly, the buyer pays the buyer agent directly. That is scenario number 2. A third scenario could be a combination scenario where the seller pays the listing agent, and then the seller and the buyer, during the process of negotiating the terms of the offer and the terms of the exchange, agreed that they would essentially share what they paid the buyer agent. So the seller may pay the buyer agent something, and the buyer may pay the buyer agent something. So they share the compensation of what they pay the buyer agent. And most importantly, the last situation is where the seller still pays the listing agent. And you will hear this term often, which is called concessions. And all that it means is adjustments in the terms of exchange. So you may want to stay, if the seller wants to stay in the house a little longer, if the buyer actually wants to keep the furniture, all of that happens as a part of the terms of exchange. And it is wrapped into this word called concessions. And the concession is just the adjustments of the terms of exchange. So the seller in this case may say, instead of paying the buyer agent directly, the seller may give a concession, say in this case of $4,000 to the buyer, and the buyer takes that concession and pays the buyer agent. If you notice, there's something very unique happening here. I'm going to switch colors to red, which is my favorite color, to show you something where cooperation compensation is no longer in place, meaning the 2 agents, like they used to share these commissions, they don't do that anymore. This is seller-directed or buyer-directed compensation. So if you notice, there is nothing there. If you notice, the listing agent and the buyer agent, or their 2 brokerages, do not cooperate, do not share commissions. This does not happen. They do not share commissions, and all of these commissions are done directly from the seller or the buyer. This is called seller-directed compensation or buyer-directed compensation, which decouples the compensation overall. And the terms of these practice changes allow for people to understand this in a more robust way. Technically, I always talk about this as being the destination being the same, the route being a little different. So I'm going to wager that in most scenarios, the destination, the end result will be very close to similar, but how we show the optics, the semantics, and the mechanics are just a little different overall. So I wanted to kind of take you through this. It may be confusing, but just wanted to give you a high level of it is going to be seller-directed or buyer-directed compensation, and there is no more sharing of compensation between the 2 agents and brokers. Cool. Awesome. That brings us to the last point that I want to kind of bring to you is something that is called advertising offers of buyer agent compensation. So if you're not familiar with this, let me explain how this works. So let's say this listing agent brings on this home, right? And they bring on this home what agents generally do is agents have a technology platform that they work with on an industry-based licensed agent property database. So only the licensed agent are allowed to utilize this database, and it is called the MLS, or the multiple listing service. We have hundreds of MLSs in each of the markets around our country, and only licensed agents have access to all the properties, both the properties and their records. So it may be properties that are just coming to market, properties that are currently on the market, properties that have been sold, and all the data associated with it, which gives these licensed agents a chance to work with the data to serve clients well. So in this case, in the past, what would happen is that a listing agent would say, okay, hey, I as a listing agent, I'm going to keep the $6,000 of commission that is presented to me, and I'm going to offer out $4,000 of commission to the potential buyer agent. And the listing agent puts this $4,000 of commission into the multiple listing service for all buyer agents in the marketplace to see. And this way, the buyer agent can then go to their clients and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this buyer, this property is offering this structure. We should go see it, and it can make our offer a lot more attractive. And they use the buyer agent compensation as a way to build a great offer overall. And this exists because when you can actually showcase what is being offered to the buyer agent, it showcases one important thing, which is cooperation compensation or broker-to-broker compensation. This is what used to happen in the past, but going forward, this is not happening anymore. So what is the path for the future? So there are three big paths for the future. Let me actually walk you through all three paths, which I think will be helpful to you. Path number one is this, which is there's no more offers of buyer agent compensation on the MLS. So this will never be seen anymore because we believe that now the seller should control what is actually being shown and use that as a terms of exchange. However, it is okay to advertise off the MLS the buyer agent compensation, but it needs to be seller directed. The seller and the buyer agent, the seller and the listing agent need to understand and agree upon the strategy of how they're going to advertise this buyer compensation. Should it be an incentive? Should it be withheld as a negotiating tactic? What should it be? So they have a good understanding of it overall. And the third is that how does this actual process take place? So let's say you're a buyer. Let's say you enter into a buyer agreement with an agent. This agent now, and you want to submit an offer on this house. This is really good because now you put an offer in on this house. Well, in the conceptual way, and there's no technical breakdown of this, but I want to explain this to you. The offer in the new world has two philosophical parts. Part one of the offer is the terms of purchase. What is the overall terms of purchase of the house? Hey, here's the cash consideration. Maybe there's a loan. Maybe there's some contingency periods. Maybe they want the washer dryer. Maybe they want X amount of days to actually finish. All the terms are associated with the offer of the house. But it's also going to include a request from the seller for buyer agent compensation. So this offer is going to be packaged and presented by the buyer agent to the seller on, hey, here are the terms of the offer. This also includes a request for buyer agent compensation. Now, the buyer agent compensation is part of the terms of the offer and is negotiated just like anything else overall. And that's why we talked about the various versions of seller-directed buyer compensation. This is a process change. Now, you don't have to understand or know this. I just think you needed to know this in concept, but your agent can explain all of this to you. This is a small change in the practice of how things are done, and this will allow for a better negotiating leverage and more transparency in the entire process. These are the only things that you need to kind of know overall. So you may be saying, all right, Sharran, that's very interesting. Kind of come summarize all of this for me. So there's three things overall that we need to know. Thing number one is buyer's agents must enter into a written agreement with the buyer in order to actually help them and be their fiduciary in supporting them to getting a home that they want at a price that they want, at the terms that they want. Number two is these practice changes are all moving towards compensation that is paid directly by the seller or the buyer. So we call it seller-directed compensation or buyer-directed compensation. There is no more cooperation or sharing of commissions between the listing broker or the listing agent, the buyer broker or the buyer agent. And last but not least, there are no more offers of compensation to be made on the MLS, allowing for true decoupling and full strategy of what buyers and sellers want to do in this offer negotiation process. All right, so whenever I present this to our clients, they always end up saying, hey, Sharran, I have a bunch of questions. So I summarized the 5 big questions that you're probably thinking of right now. The first question is, hey, are commissions fixed or set? Well, let me tell you this. Nothing is fixed or set, and nothing has ever been, and nothing is ever going to be, because this is all based on a terms of exchange. All that needs to happen is that a seller of a home and a buyer of a home need to agree upon certain terms. A part of those terms include commissions and compensation. So none of it is fixed. The terms of a house can differ. You may be willing to sell your house for $1 a day for the next 4 million years. You may be asked for $10 million a day. You may want to pay commissions. You may not want to pay commissions. None of it is set. It is ensuring the smoothest possible way for buyers and sellers to get to the terms that they want in this entire transaction. That's number one. Here's number two, which is, well, Sharran, I've heard that I don't have to pay commissions anymore. It is actually true. You never had to pay commissions before. You never had to pay commissions in the future. But the most important part of this is the commissions are consideration paid for representation. So if you would like professional representation, then there's a fee that comes with it. For example, there are situations where home sellers may choose to list their home for sale by owner. They don't pay a listing side representation for that. There are times when a buyer may choose to not be represented in this process. They don't have to pay buy side representation. But there are studies that have shown that utilizing and working with a licensed professional almost always in the highest of statistically significant scenarios provides you a better result. Now, it is up to you on whether you want to pay commissions or not, but most importantly, commissions are tied to consideration for representation, meaning if you have professional representation, which we suggest, having done this, which I suggest you do, even me as knowing all of this, I still work with a licensed agent every single day as I buy and sell property. So if you don't have to pay any commissions, but if you want representation, you have to figure out what part of that process and negotiate that with your representative, just like you would with your CPA or your attorney or any other professional service professional, right? That's number two. Here's number three. Do I have to sign a buyer representation agreement? Yes. This is just like we sign a listing agreement to bring a home to market. As a potential home buyer, you will sign a buyer representation agreement to engage professional services of a buyer agent to help you through that process. And that buyer agent can take you through all the terms of that representation agreement so that they can work in their fiduciary capacity with you. So yes, you have to sign a buyer representation agreement to be actively involved working with an agent in the process of buying a home. The question is, does this apply to certain markets or certain types of properties? So this applies to residential real estate properties at this time, but this new rule set is actually impacting the entire United States. There's a couple of local markets that have some litigation legal nuance, but I'm going to foresee that even that goes away. And this is going to be a rule set that is accepted by all parties in all states and DC in the United States. So yes, I would assume that this applies to all markets and residential properties. And last but not least, the question is, hey, can I just work with my agent that I already know and love? Yes, absolutely. Nothing changes in how this agent represents you. There are just some practice changes overall in this process. And yes, you could call your agent, you should talk to them about it. And yes, you should, if you love working with your agent, please continue to work with them because they are here in service of you. Now, I want to finish up by just saying this one thing, which is I've had a chance, a unique perspective to do something different. I've had 20 plus years in this business. I've done a lot of interesting things. I've worked in Silicon Valley. I've worked on Wall Street. I've run a private equity firm. I've been a real estate investor. We now run one of the largest real estate companies in the world. And I will tell you, all of those are not as hard as being a real estate agent. And you may think that's a little tongue in cheek, but I mean this with the utmost respect, because the real estate profession has had a diffusion of optics, meaning from the outside looking in, it looks like a very simplistic job. But having worked with real estate agents for 20 plus years, I will tell you that the complexity of what an agent goes through, understanding the broader rules of the marketplace, understanding how agents actually collaborate in the marketplace, understanding each of the forms to protect you, understanding the process changes of negotiation, understanding how to bring a home to market, how to negotiate on each of these processes, what vendors to bring in to actually get you the final settlement. These are not only are complex and involve dozens of parties that are involved in the transaction, but the sequence of them, the way to negotiate with them and to pull them all together is something that artificial intelligence can't do at this time. So even as an avid, that I own my home and I own thousands of units, I still work with a real estate agent every single time in every single transaction. And I think it's a positive thing overall. And these new rule sets actually further establish professional representation and compensation based on representation, which I think is a good thing for the entire industry as a whole. So most importantly, I have one last thing for you, which is please call your real estate agent. if you are thinking about what it means for the value of your home, if you're thinking about what the home would be worth in today's market, or what would it take to actually sell in today's marketplace, or you think about buying a home in the near future or investing in real estate, please call your real estate agent, because they are the licensed professional to support you with one of life's most complex transactions. And it also calls for them to be a fiduciary, to always put your interests above anything else.